I never imagined that my own sister, the person who shared my childhood bedroom and family dinners, would one day deliberately try to destroy my future. But as I sat on the cold tile floor of our garage, cradling my throbbing right hand, I knew without question that this was no accident. The sharp, searing pain shot up my arm in waves, and I could already feel the swelling tightening the skin. I tried to move my fingers, but the moment I attempted it, the agony made me dizzy. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat as the image of her face burned in my mind, the smirk, the narrowed eyes, the way she whispered those chilling words. "Good luck writing your exam now." For a long moment, I just sat there, my breathing ragged, feeling the cold creeping into my bones from the cement beneath me. My name is Claire Matthews. I am 18 years old, and in that moment, I was staring at the wreckage of years of hard work and sacrifice, because the exam I was supposed to take in less than 24 hours was not just any test. It was the state qualifying exam that would decide whether I received a full scholarship to the university I had dreamed about since freshman year. Without that scholarship, there was no other path. My father had made it clear he would not pay for college. He believed education was a waste for girls, and if I wanted it, I had to earn it myself. That challenge had fueled me for years. I had studied late into countless nights, worked part-time jobs to cover application fees, and turned down social events so I could keep my grades perfect. I had reached the point where my name was whispered among the teachers as the most promising student our high school had seen in a decade. And my sister Emily had heard those whispers too. She was 2 years older, still living at home after dropping out of community college, drifting between part-time jobs and seething at the attention I received. This was not the first time she had tried to trip me up. I remembered missing pages from my term paper in sophomore year, my calculator mysteriously vanishing on the morning of my SATs, and the sports injury that happened when my sneakers were found with the soles sliced halfway through. Each time I had my suspicions, but there had never been proof. Each time, my father told me to stop making trouble and focus on my work. My mother avoided the subject altogether. But now, as I sat with my broken hand in the garage, I knew this was not something I could just shrug off. My mind replayed the seconds before it happened. I had been walking through the garage to get my backpack from the car. Emily had offered in a tone too sweet to be genuine to help me carry my books. I had declined politely, sensing her sudden burst of helpfulness was suspicious. She followed me anyway, humming under her breath, and just as I reached for the handle of the backseat door, she grabbed my right wrist in both hands and twisted hard, fast with a sharp downward force. The crack echoed in my ears. I dropped to my knees, instantly gasping in shock. She let go, stepping back with that smirk I would never forget, then walked away without another word. In those first moments, the reality hit me like another blow. My writing hand was gone. My exam was tomorrow. My future, my years of discipline, everything I had built was hanging by a thread. Panic rose like a tide, choking me. Then I heard footsteps. My father appeared in the doorway, his eyes scanning the scene. He saw me clutching my hand, saw the pain twisting my face, but instead of rushing to help, his expression hardened. He told me to get up, to stop acting dramatic. I tried to tell him what Emily had done, but he cut me off with a cold voice, saying, "We will not talk about this outside this house. Do you understand me, Claire? This will ruin your sister's life if anyone finds out, and it will ruin this family's name." He crouched down close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath and said, "You will go along with the story that you tripped." End of discussion. The mix of betrayal and disbelief nearly made me cry, but I bit it back. The urge to argue was crushed under the weight of knowing he had no interest in my side. In his mind, Emily's comfort mattered more than my broken hand, more than my future. That realization was as painful as the injury itself. When my mother came into the garage moments later, her eyes darted from me to my father, then away. She did not ask what happened. She simply said we should get to the emergency room before it swelled too badly. My father drove silent while I held my hand close to my chest, each bump in the road sending fresh waves of pain. At the hospital, he told the intake nurse I had fallen on the driveway. I opened my mouth to correct him, but the sharp look he gave me froze the words in my throat. The doctor confirmed a fracture set the bone and put me in a cast from fingertips to elbow. I left with a prescription for painkillers and the grim knowledge that I could not grip a pen. As we drove home, my father reminded me again, this does not leave the family. I stared out the window, the streetlights blurring as my eyes filled. Somewhere, deep inside, a small voice was already whispering that this was not the end of my story, and that the only way I would survive this was by finding a way to win anyway. Long before the day my sister broke my hand, the seeds of her resentment had been planted and carefully tended over years of comparisons, favoritism, and quiet cruelty. Growing up in our small suburban neighborhood in Ohio, our house looked like the picture of middle-class respectability. The lawn was always trimmed. My mother hosted holiday dinners with silverware polished to a mirror shine, and my father made sure we were dressed appropriately for Sunday church. To anyone outside, we were a close-knit family. Inside, the atmosphere was entirely different. Emily, my sister, had been my father's golden child until her grades began to slip in middle school. She was praised for her looks, her charm, and her ability to make friends, but when academics demanded more than surface-level effort, she retreated. By the time she entered high school, she was skipping homework, failing classes, and showing no interest in college. I, on the other hand, was studious from the start. I devoured library books, joined the debate team, and filled my calendar with honor society meetings and science fairs. Teachers sent home glowing reports about my diligence and determination. At first, I thought my sister simply did not care about school, but over time I began to notice the way her jaw tightened when I brought home awards. My father's comments made it worse. He would pat my shoulder in front of her and say things like, "Your sister should take notes from you, Claire. She is wasting her potential." Emily would laugh it off in public, but in private her eyes hardened, and that's when the small sabotage began. In ninth grade, I spent weeks crafting a history project on World War II, carefully building a detailed diorama. The morning it was due, I found it in pieces on the floor of our shared room, the tiny figures snapped in half. Emily claimed she accidentally knocked it off the desk while reaching for her makeup bag. My father told me accidents happen. The following year, the night before my sophomore science fair, my notes vanished. I tore apart my backpack and desk looking for them, finally finding them crumpled at the bottom of the trash bin in the garage. Emily swore she had no idea how they got there. Again, my father told me not to make accusations. I learned quickly that confronting her only made me look like the petty, jealous one. It became a pattern. My gym clothes disappeared before a big track meet. My graphing calculator was gone the morning of the SATs. A week later, it reappeared in the laundry basket. Even my friendships seemed to fall into her line of fire. More than once, she spread rumors about me to people I trusted, causing rifts I could not easily mend. My mother would sigh and say, "You two need to get along," without ever acknowledging the deliberate malice behind these events. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on my long-term goal, earning the scholarship that would be my ticket out of the house. By junior year, I had my eyes set on Westbridge University, a top-ranked school with a full-ride academic scholarship for the highest scorer on the state's qualifying exam. Every teacher I had encouraged me to go for it, saying I had the brains, the work ethic, and the grit to win. I poured myself into preparation. I gave up weekends, turned down dates, and carried flashcards in my pocket to review between classes. Emily seemed to take my determination as a personal insult. She began making comments in a mocking tone, telling me I was boring, a robot, and that no guy would ever date someone who studied as much as I did. I brushed her off, but deep down I felt the sting. Still, I did not believe she would ever physically harm me. That was before the argument in the kitchen 2 weeks before the exam. I had been making tea late at night when she came in rummaging through the fridge. She asked if I really thought a test score would change my life. I told her it would because it was my chance to get out to build something better. Her face twisted into something I had never seen before. She said, "Must be nice to think you're better than everyone else," then stormed off. I told myself she was just lashing out. In hindsight, that conversation feels like a warning I missed. The week leading up to the exam was a blur of study sessions and practice essays. Emily watched me from the couch as I paced with my notes, her expression unreadable. I remember catching her looking at my hands one evening as I annotated a textbook. She smirked when she saw me notice, then looked away. It was the kind of moment you only understand after the damage is done. I should have recognized it as a predator studying prey, But I had been trained all my life to give her the benefit of the doubt to avoid accusing her without proof, because in our family, proof never seemed to matter. What mattered was keeping the peace, keeping our image intact. My father's mantra was simple: family business stays in the family. That rule had silenced me for years, but I didn't know yet that breaking it would be the only thing that would save me. By the time the morning of the attack came, Emily's resentment had reached a quiet, dangerous boil, and I was too focused on my dream to see it. The morning before the exam began like any other, but with a knot of tension in my stomach that had been building for days. I woke before my alarm, lying still in bed and running through formulas and essay outlines in my mind. The pale winter light leaked through the blinds and the house was quiet except for the low hum of the furnace. I dressed carefully, choosing the softest sweater I owned to keep me warm in the drafty exam hall, then packed my notes and a set of sharpened pencils into my backpack. My right hand felt steady as I zipped the bag, and I remember thinking that all I had to do was make it through one more day. Downstairs, my father was already reading the paper at the kitchen table. He grunted in acknowledgement as I poured myself some cereal. My mother busied herself at the sink. Emily was nowhere to be seen, and I hoped she would stay that way. I needed calm. I had just finished breakfast when she appeared, hair pulled back, wearing an oversized hoodie that made her look almost harmless. She asked casually if I needed help carrying my things to the car. The offer was so out of character that it made me pause. I told her I was fine, but she insisted, saying the garage door was sticking and she could help me load my bag. I did not want to argue in front of our parents, so I relented, telling myself that refusing might just provoke some new kind of drama. We stepped into the garage, the cold air hitting my face and making me shiver. The smell of oil and dust hung in the air. My car sat parked in its usual spot, the passenger seat piled with textbooks I had reviewed the night before. I walked toward the back door of the car to put my backpack inside. Emily followed close behind, too close. I could hear the faint rustle of her hoodie with each step. I reached for the handle, and that is when it happened. Her hands shot forward, gripping my right wrist with startling strength. Before I could react, she twisted hard and fast, pushing down with her weight. The sound was sickening. A sharp crack, followed by a wave of pain so intense it stole my breath. I dropped to my knees, the backpack slipping from my shoulder and hitting the floor with a dull thud. My vision blurred, spots dancing in front of my eyes as I tried to process what had just happened. Emily released my wrist and stepped back, her face calm, but her eyes burning with something cold and triumphant. She leaned in just enough for me to hear her whisper, "Good luck writing your exam now." The words cut deeper than the injury, a confirmation that this was not an accident, not a moment of clumsy sibling roughhousing. This was calculated, deliberate, and timed with precision to cause the maximum damage. I clutched my hand to my chest, feeling the swelling already beginning, and a wave of nausea rolled through me. For a moment, I thought I might pass out. She turned and walked toward the door, back into the house, not looking back. My mind raced. The exam was tomorrow. My dominant hand was useless. My scholarship was slipping away before my eyes. I wanted to scream for my parents, to demand that they see what she had done, but just as I opened my mouth, heavy footsteps sounded behind me. My father appeared in the doorway, his gaze sweeping over the scene. His eyes flicked from my hunched form to Emily's retreating back, and I thought I saw a flash of understanding there, but it was gone in an instant. He told me to get up, his voice cold. I tried to tell him what had happened, but he cut me off sharply. "We will not discuss this outside of this family," he said. "Do you understand? This will ruin your sister's future and shame us all if people hear about it." I stared at him in disbelief, the pain in my hand throbbing with every heartbeat. My mother appeared behind him, her face pale. She did not ask what had happened either. Instead, she said we should get to the hospital before it got worse. My father drove the silence in the car, as oppressive as the pain in my arm. Every bump in the road sent fresh agony shooting up to my elbow. At the hospital, he told the intake nurse I had tripped over a box in the garage. I tried to correct him, but his glare froze the words in my throat. The doctor examined me, confirmed a fracture, and fitted my arm with a cast. As he spoke about healing time, I felt the weight of the situation sink in 6 to 8 weeks before I could use my hand normally. My exam was in less than 24 hours. When we left, my father repeated his warning. This does not leave the family. I sat in the back seat on the way home, my cast heavy on my arm, my dreams hanging by a thread. Somewhere deep inside, something hardened. I did not know how yet, but I would find a way to take that exam, and I would make sure that Emily's plan failed. The drive home from the hospital felt longer than it was, each streetlight casting brief flashes of pale light across the inside of the car, highlighting the stern lines of my father's face and the way my mother kept her eyes fixed on her lap. My right arm ached inside the cast, the painkillers dulling only the sharpest edges of the throbbing, and every time the car jolted over a pothole, a fresh wave of agony surged through my hand. I wanted to ask again why we were pretending this was an accident, why we were protecting Emily, but the atmosphere in the car told me that no answer I received would be honest or satisfying. When we pulled into the driveway, Emily's car was gone. My father told me to go straight upstairs and rest. I could feel the weight of his authority pressing down on me, the same force that had silenced me for years. I obeyed, moving slowly up the staircase, each step echoing with my unspoken questions. In my room, the familiar walls felt different, almost hostile, like they had been complicit in years of quiet betrayals. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my cast, the stark white plaster a visible reminder of what she had done. I could still hear her whisper, "Good luck writing your exam now," as if she had branded it into my mind. Downstairs, I heard my parents' voices low but urgent. I crept to the top of the stairs, careful not to let the boards creak, and caught fragments of their conversation. My father was saying that this would blow over if I kept my mouth shut, that people didn't need to know about the sisterly fight that got out of hand. My mother's voice was hesitant, suggesting maybe Emily should at least apologize, but my father shut her down, saying an apology would be an admission of guilt. I felt my stomach twist. There was no intention here of accountability, no acknowledgement of the damage done, only a plan to bury the truth under the same rug where all of Emily's past misdeeds had been swept. Later, my mother came upstairs with a tray of soup and a glass of water. She avoided my eyes as she set it on my desk. I asked her quietly why no one was willing to tell the truth. She sighed and said it was better for everyone if we moved on, that I needed to focus on my exam and not create unnecessary trouble. Her tone was gentle, but the words felt like betrayal. Trouble in our house meant honesty. Trouble meant refusing to pretend. I wanted to push the tray away to make her see how wrong this was, but I knew from experience it would only result in her retreating further. After she left, I sat in the dim light of my desk lamp, thinking about the countless times my father had silenced me in the name of family unity. The time Emily accidentally deleted my college application from the shared computer, the time my sports uniform was found soaked in bleach the day of the championship, the time my allergy medication was replaced with something else entirely. Each incident had been explained away, forgiven, forgotten by everyone except me. And now here I was on the eve of the most important exam of my life, with my dominant hand useless and my family insisting I carry the lie that protected the person who had put me in this position. The next morning, my father acted as though nothing had happened. He left for work without a word about my injury. My mother reminded me to take my pain medication and suggested I try to rest before the exam. Emily returned home in the afternoon, breezing past my room with a faint smile as if daring me to confront her. I didn't, not yet. But inside, something had shifted. I realized that if I wanted to salvage my future, I could no longer rely on my family for support or protection. I would need to find another way, one that did not depend on anyone in this house believing me or standing up for me. That night, I sat with my notes spread out on my bed, struggling to figure out how I could possibly write the exam with my left hand. My handwriting with it was slow and awkward, and every minute I practiced, frustration bubbled higher. Still, I kept going, forcing myself to adapt. The room was silent except for the scratch of pen on paper and the faint hum of the heater. I didn't know how it would work out, but I knew I would not give Emily the satisfaction of seeing me quit. In that silence, I made myself a promise I would take the exam, I would score high enough for the scholarship, and when I succeeded, it would be in spite of her, in spite of my father's warnings, in spite of the years of sabotage and silence. They might have broken my hand, but they would not break me. That night, as the house settled into its usual evening quiet, I sat on my bed staring at the cast encasing my right hand, my textbooks and practice essays spread around me like the remains of a plan that had just been blown apart. The dull ache in my wrist was a constant reminder of what Emily had done, but beneath the pain was a sharper feeling, one that surprised me defiance. I thought about all the years I had followed my father's rules, all the times I had bitten my tongue to keep the peace, and how every act of compliance had only made it easier for Emily to keep hurting me. I realized that this time I couldn't follow the script they wanted. I picked up my phone with my left hand and opened my email. My fingers stumbled over the keyboard, the typing slow and awkward, but I managed to send a short message to Mrs. Parker, my guidance counselor, telling her I had injured my writing hand but was determined to sit for the exam. I didn't explain how it had happened not yet, but I asked if there was any accommodation the state board could offer for someone in my situation. Within an hour, she replied with concern, saying she would reach out to the exam coordinator first thing in the morning and that I should focus on rest and whatever practice I could manage. That small acknowledgement that someone outside my family cared enough to take action lifted something heavy off my chest. I also texted my best friend Hannah, explaining that I had broken my hand but was still planning to take the exam. She was furious on my behalf, immediately offering to come over and help me practice writing with my left hand. The next afternoon, Hannah showed up with a stack of lined paper and a determination that matched my own. We sat at my desk, her timing me on practice essays, coaching me on how to hold the pen to reduce strain, and brainstorming ways to write legibly, even if I couldn't write quickly. She was patient when my letters came out jagged, reminding me that clarity mattered more than speed. Meanwhile, Mrs. Parker kept me updated. She had spoken to the state board, and they agreed to allow me extra time on the exam if I provided a doctor's note confirming my injury. That meant I could pace myself and not be penalized for slower writing. When I asked my father to drive me back to the doctor for the note, he gave me a long look but didn't argue. Maybe he didn't want to risk questions from school officials, or maybe he thought extra time wouldn't make a difference. Either way, I took the small victory. At the doctor's office, I kept my story vague, but Dr. Reynolds examined my cast and signed the note without hesitation, adding that I should avoid any unnecessary strain. I didn't tell him that my entire plan was to strain the injury as much as needed for those exam hours. Back at home, I began to feel a quiet network forming around me, small but solid. Hannah, Mrs. Parker, and now even Dr. Reynolds in his own way. None of them knew the full truth yet, but they believed in my ability to get through this. That belief became fuel. I started reorganizing my notes into the most essential points, cutting anything that would take too long to write. I wrote outlines instead of full paragraphs in practice, focusing on key words I could expand verbally if needed. Hannah suggested I practice filling in multiple-choice answers left-handed too, since even that was clumsy at first. Every evening, we worked until my left hand cramped, and then we worked a little longer. Emily avoided me during this time, which I found both a relief and a sign that she was waiting to see me fail. My father barely spoke to me, his silence a wall I didn't care to breach. My mother lingered in doorways now and then, looking like she wanted to say something, but she never did. In those final hours before the exam, the tension in the house was thick enough to taste, but I kept my focus narrow. I reminded myself over and over that this was bigger than a test score now. This was proof to myself, to anyone watching, that I could rise above the sabotage, the lies, and the silence. I didn't know exactly what winning would look like, but I knew losing would mean letting her succeed, and I had decided with every part of me that still worked that I would not give her that satisfaction. 2 days after my injury, the first crack in Emily's carefully constructed wall of deniability appeared, and it came from the last place I expected. Our neighbor, Mr. Harris, who lived across the street, knocked on our door in the late afternoon. I was in the living room with my notes spread across the coffee table, trying to keep my mind in study mode. My father answered the door, his voice low at first, and then sharper as the conversation went on. Curious, I drifted closer, until I could see them through the hallway. Mr. Harris was holding a small portable drive and explaining something about his garage security system. Apparently, his camera faced part of our driveway and garage entrance, and he had been reviewing footage after noticing a package thief in the neighborhood. While going through the recordings, he had seen something else me and Emily in our garage on the morning of my injury. He said he thought I should have it in case I needed it for insurance or legal reasons. My father's expression tightened, and he thanked Mr. Harris curtly before trying to close the door, but Mr. Harris insisted on handing him the drive directly. I stepped into the hall and asked what it was. My father gave me a look that told me to stay silent, but the moment he put the drive on the entryway table and walked off, I snatched it up and hurried to my room. My hands shook as I plugged it into my laptop. The video was clear despite the winter light it showed me walking to my car, Emily following the sudden movement of her grabbing my wrist, the twist, and me collapsing to my knees. Even without audio, the intent was obvious. I watched it twice, my stomach tightening each time I saw her smirk before walking away. This was the proof I had never had before the thing that could shatter years of gaslighting and denial. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the paused frame of her face, a strange mix of vindication and dread coursing through me. My first instinct was to run downstairs and show my parents, but I already knew how that would go. My father would say it was taken out of context, my mother would avoid eye contact, and Emily would spin some story about an accident gone wrong. No, I needed to be strategic. That evening, I called Mrs. Parker and asked if I could meet her before the exam to give her something important. She agreed immediately, concern in her voice. I didn't tell her what it was over the phone. I also texted Hannah asking if she could bring her laptop the next day. If my family wanted to pretend nothing happened, I would find the right audience for this truth. The next morning, while my father was at work and my mother was grocery shopping, Emily knocked on my door. She leaned against the frame like she owned the space, asking how my studying was going in a tone that dripped with mockery. I looked her straight in the eye and said nothing. Just let the silence stretch until her smirk faltered. It was a small victory, but it tasted good. That night, I backed up the video in 3 different places, my email a cloud drive and a USB hidden in my backpack. I also wrote a brief statement about what happened, sticking to facts and leaving out emotion, knowing that people took you more seriously when you sounded composed. The plan was forming in my mind. I would hand the video and the statement to Mrs. Parker and the exam proctor. They couldn't ignore it if it was tied to a formal request for accommodation, and if Emily thought she had ended my chances, she would see soon enough that she had only made me more determined. My mother knocked on my door just before bed, asking if I needed anything for the exam. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. After days of silence, she wanted to play the role of supportive parent. I told her I was fine, and she nodded, lingering for a moment before leaving. I wondered if she suspected I had something that could blow this open. Whether she did or not, tomorrow would tell. That night, I barely slept, my mind running through every possible outcome. But one thought anchored me: the truth was no longer just mine. It was recorded, undeniable, and ready to be seen. Emily's advantage had always been the shadows, the whispered lies, the plausible deniability. Now I had something brighter than any lie could withstand, and I was ready to use it. The morning of the exam dawned gray and cold, a thin layer of frost coating the lawns as I stepped outside with my backpack slung over my good shoulder. My right arm hung heavy in the cast tucked against my body under my coat, while my left hand gripped the strap tightly. Hannah pulled up in her car exactly when she said she would, her laptop bag on the passenger seat and a determined look on her face. I climbed in, grateful to be leaving the oppressive silence of my house behind for a few hours. We drove in near silence, the tension of the day pressing on both of us, until she glanced over and asked if I had the video. I patted my backpack, feeling the reassuring weight of the USB drive inside, along with the printed statement I had written. When we arrived at the testing center, the parking lot was already filling with students clutching coffee cups and thick binders. Inside, the air buzzed with nervous energy. I spotted Mrs. Parker near the registration table, her warm smile cutting through the haze of anxiety. I approached her quietly, pulling her aside into a corner of the lobby. Without a word, I handed her the envelope containing my statement and the USB drive. Her brow furrowed as she glanced at the contents, and I whispered that it explained my injury. She gave me a look that was equal parts concern and resolve, then slipped it into her bag and told me to focus on my exam while she took care of the rest. A proctor called my name, and I was led to a seat near the front of the room, separated slightly from the others so I could have extra space for my cast. The desk felt too small for the task ahead, but I arranged my pencils eraser and scratch paper as best I could with my left hand. When the clock hit 9, the test began. The first section was multiple choice, and even that proved more challenging than I expected. My left hand cramped quickly, my letters uneven and slower than I wanted, but I forced myself to breathe and focus. I remembered Hannah's advice: clarity over speed. I kept my writing deliberate, making sure each bubble was filled completely. By the time we moved to the essay section, my arm ached from shoulder to fingertips. I shook it out discreetly, flexing my fingers before picking up the pen again. This was the part that mattered most to my score, the part I had always excelled in when I had the use of my dominant hand. I sketched an outline, first short phrases to keep my thoughts organized, then began writing in steady, careful strokes. Every sentence felt like a small battle, the physical strain threatening to pull my focus from the ideas I was trying to express. I reminded myself that I had endured worse pain in the past week, that this was nothing compared to letting Emily win. Midway through, I caught sight of Mrs. Parker speaking quietly with another official at the back of the room. They glanced in my direction once before returning to their discussion. I had no idea if they had looked at the video yet, but the thought that someone else knew the truth steadied me. The final section of the exam was a mix of problem solving and short responses. By then, my left hand felt like it was made of lead, but I pushed through, pausing only to stretch my fingers between questions. When the proctor announced 10 minutes remaining, a spark of adrenaline jolted me into a final burst of focus. I filled the last answer just as time was called, setting my pen down with a mix of exhaustion and pride. I had done it not perfectly, maybe not even as well as I could have with my right hand, but I had finished. As the other students filed out, Mrs. Parker approached me and asked if I could wait a moment. She led me to a small office down the hall where the head proctor sat with a laptop open. On the screen, frozen on a still frame, was Emily in the garage, her hands on my wrist. The head proctor looked at me and said, "I believe this explains quite a bit." I knotted my throat tight. They told me the footage would be documented and forwarded to the appropriate school and state officials, both for the sake of my exam accommodations and because it clearly showed intentional harm. Walking out of the building into the cold afternoon air, I felt lighter than I had in days. The exam was over. The truth was no longer buried, and whatever came next, Emily's shadow over me had started to shrink. Hannah drove us away from the testing center, glancing at me with a grin. "No matter what," she said, "you just did something incredible." For the first time in a long time, I believed her. The results came faster than I expected. Just 5 days after the exam, Mrs. Parker called me into her office after school. I walked in with my cast still heavy on my arm, unsure if this was about my score or the video. She closed the door behind me and slid an envelope across her desk. Inside was an official letter from the State Scholarship Board congratulating me on scoring in the top 1% statewide and confirming my full scholarship to Westbridge University. My chest tightened as I read the words, a rush of relief and vindication flooding through me. Before I could even process it fully, Mrs. Parker leaned forward and told me that the video had been forwarded to the school board, who in turn had notified the local authorities. There would be no criminal charges unless I pursued them, but the evidence had already made its way through enough channels that my father could no longer contain it. That evening, I arrived home to find my parents waiting in the living room, their faces drawn tight. Emily sat in the corner of the couch, arms crossed, eyes darting between us. My father wasted no time accusing me of humiliating the family by letting the school see the video. I reminded him that I had not let them see it. It had been their choice after reviewing evidence that concerned my safety. He slammed his hand on the coffee table, his voice rising as he said, I had betrayed my own blood. My mother tried to interject, but he spoke over her. I turned to Emily, holding up the scholarship letter. "This," I said, "is what you tried to stop." "You didn't." Her face flushed red, and for a moment she seemed at a loss for words, but then she snapped back with a sneer, saying I got lucky and that I wasn't as smart as I thought. Something in me hardened. I told her in front of our parents that luck had nothing to do with spending years working for this while she spent years trying to tear me down. The air in the room shifted, a tension crackling as my father opened his mouth to defend her again. But before he could, Emily made a fatal mistake. She muttered that she had only wanted to make things even, that I had been handed everything while she got nothing. The words hung there for a moment, and I saw my mother's face change, maybe not to guilt, but to something like shock. I took the moment and pushed. I reminded them all of every incident over the years, the missing assignments, the ruined projects, the sabotaged competitions, each one now framed as part of a pattern rather than isolated accidents. My father barked that I was exaggerating, but his voice no longer carried the weight it once did. My mother stayed silent, her eyes flicking toward Emily in a way that told me she was replaying old memories she had ignored. Finally, I said what I had wanted to for years. You've both protected her at my expense, and you've taught her that she can do anything to me without consequence. That ends now. I turned and walked out before they could respond, my pulse pounding. Hannah was waiting for me outside in her car, and I slid in without looking back. As we drove away, I realized this had been the confrontation I needed, not just to stand up to Emily, but to break the hold my father's silence had over me. The next morning at school, news of my scholarship was announced over the PA system. My classmates clapped when I walked into first period, and several teachers stopped me in the hall to offer congratulations. Word about the video had spread quietly, too, not in sensational gossip, but in whispers of respect for how I had handled it. That afternoon, Mrs. Parker told me she had received an email from the district superintendent praising my resilience and offering to connect me with a mentorship program for other students dealing with hostile home environments. I accepted without hesitation. Emily avoided me entirely after that, and my father's conversations with me became perfunctory, stripped of warmth. My mother oscillated between small attempts at normalcy and long silences. It didn't matter. I had one foot already out the door, and the next chapter of my life was beginning on my terms. Graduation day arrived under a sky so clear it felt like a promise. I stood in line with my classmates in the school gym, the air buzzing with chatter and the faint rustle of gowns. My cap was pinned over hair I had spent too long trying to tame that morning, and my cast was finally gone, replaced by a light brace I barely noticed. As we filed out into the football field, the sight of the bleachers packed with families and friends hit me with a mix of nerves and pride. I scanned the crowd but didn't see my parents or Emily, and a part of me had expected that. Instead, near the front row, Hannah waved wildly, Mrs. Parker beside her, both of them grinning. Behind them sat Dr. Reynolds, who had quietly checked on me after the exam, and a few teachers who had supported me over the years. These were my people now, my chosen witnesses. When my name was called, the cheers from that corner of the bleachers were louder than anything else I heard. Walking across the stage, diploma in hand, I felt a surge of something deeper than relief. It was the knowledge that I had made it here, not because of my family's support, but in spite of their attempts to hold me back. After the ceremony, the group gathered around me offering hugs and congratulations. Mrs. Parker handed me a small gift, a leather-bound journal, saying it was for the next chapter of my story. Hannah insisted we take pictures capturing the moment where my smile was genuine and unburdened. That evening, while others were at family dinners, I was at Hannah's house for a small celebration she had put together with a few close friends. We ate pizza, laughed over old stories, and toasted with soda to the fact that in 3 months I would be moving into my dorm at Westbridge University. As the night wore on, I thought about Emily, about the look on her face when she realized her plan had failed, and instead of bitterness, I felt a strange sense of closure. She had tried to take something from me, but in doing so, she had shown me exactly who I could count on, and it wasn't her. Over the summer, I worked part-time at the local library, saving money and enjoying the quiet satisfaction of building my own way forward. I met with the mentorship program coordinator from the superintendent's office and agreed to speak at a fall workshop for students facing family hostility. Preparing for that speech made me realize how far I had come and how many others might be stuck in situations like mine, doubting their worth, because the people closest to them refused to see it. The day I left for college, Hannah helped me load the last box into her car since my father had made no offer to drive me. My mother came out to the driveway standing awkwardly and said she hoped I would keep in touch. I nodded but didn't promise. Emily stayed inside. As we pulled away, I didn't look back. The campus at Westbridge was even more beautiful than I had imagined, the brick buildings framed by leafy trees, the air filled with the hum of students finding their way. I settled into my dorm, decorated my desk with the journal Mrs. Parker had given me, and placed the scholarship letter in the top drawer as a reminder of what I had overcome. Classes challenged me in ways that thrilled me, and I threw myself into my studies with the same discipline that had carried me through high school. By the end of my first semester, I was on the dean's list and had started working as a peer tutor, helping other students find strategies for success. It wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense, there were no confrontations or public shaming, but it was the kind of quiet, sustained triumph that lasts. Every accomplishment was a step further from the garage that morning, further from my father's command to stay quiet, further from the belief that family loyalty meant enduring harm in silence. I was building a life entirely on my own terms, and with each passing day, the hold my old life had on me grew weaker until it was nothing but a shadow at my back. 6 months after moving into my dorm at Westbridge, the distance between me and my family felt both immeasurable and exactly what I needed. My life was full in ways I had never experienced before. Late nights in the library, surrounded by people who shared my ambition, weekend volunteer work with the mentorship program, and a steady stream of messages from Hannah keeping me grounded. The scholarship covered my tuition and living expenses, and the part-time tutoring job gave me enough spending money to enjoy small freedoms I had never had at home. I had not spoken to Emily since the day I left for college, and the absence of her presence was like a room I had finally aired out after years of stale, suffocating air. Then, one chilly February afternoon, an envelope arrived in my campus mailbox with my father's handwriting. Inside was a short letter, part apology, part justification. He wrote that he had acted out of fear of the family being torn apart, that he had wanted to protect us from gossip, but he admitted that in doing so, he had failed me. It was more accountability than I had ever seen from him, yet still wrapped in excuses. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of my journal without responding. I was no longer interested in arguments that began with apologies and ended with self-defense. My mother sent occasional emails about mundane things, the weather back home, updates on distant relatives, but never mentioned Emily or what had happened. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that Emily had lost another job and was struggling to find steady work. I didn't gloat, but I also didn't reach out. Actions have consequences, and the most powerful one in her case was being left to face herself without me as her target. By spring, the mentorship program invited me to speak at their annual fundraising gala. Standing at the podium in a room full of educators, community leaders, and donors, I told my story, not naming my sister, not dwelling on revenge, but focusing on the importance of believing young people when they speak about harm, even if it comes from inside the home. I spoke about the neighbor's camera, about the teacher who listened without pressing me for more than I was ready to share, about the friend who sat beside me for hours, helping me relearn how to write. When I finished, the room stood in applause. It was not the same rush as getting the scholarship letter or graduating high school. It was deeper, steadier, the feeling of having turned something ugly into something that might help someone else find their way out. After the gala, a woman approached me and said her niece had been in a similar situation, and hearing my story had given her the courage to step in and help. That was the moment I knew the full measure of my victory. It wasn't just that I had passed the exam or escaped my family's control. It was that I had taken back the narrative of my own life. In May, as my first year of college ended, I was offered a summer internship at a nonprofit that specialized in educational access for underprivileged youth. I accepted without hesitation, seeing it as another step toward the life I was building. On the last day of finals, I walked across campus in the warm sunlight, thinking about how far I had come since that morning in the garage. I remembered the cold concrete under me, the sound of the crack, the sting of my father's command to stay quiet. And then, I remembered the exam hall, the way my left hand cramped but kept going. The sight of my score, the sound of my name, called on graduation day. These were the images that defined me now. I still carried the USB drive with the video, not because I needed to use it, but because it reminded me that truth has a way of finding the light, even when others try to smother it. Sometimes I would look at it and think about how a single moment of recorded clarity had been the turning point in years of darkness. On the last evening before I headed to my summer internship, Hannah and I sat on the steps outside my dorm watching the sun set over the quad. She asked if I had any regrets. I thought about it for a moment before shaking my head. No, I said, because everything that happened brought me here. I can't change the past, but I can decide what to do with it. She smiled and said, "Well, you turned it into something no one can take from you." And she was right. My sister might have broken my hand, but she didn't break me. My father might have told me to stay quiet, but I had learned to speak in a voice louder than their denial. And my success, the scholarship, the degree I was working toward, the life I was creating, was the clearest answer I could ever give to all the years of sabotage. It was proof that no matter how much someone tries to control you, the final word belongs to you if you refuse to give it up. That was my revenge, my justice, and my freedom.